I wanted to talk about how I wanted to share this article with you, not just because I think it's a good history lesson, a reminder about the CIA, but also the fact that uh, the Global Times asked me for this article. I didn't come up with this out of my own head. They said, "Hey, do you want to write a short article on why the CIA should be abolished?" Can you imagine? Now, can you imagine? Here's the article. Can you imagine the corporate media asking for such a thing from someone like myself or anybody, really? I don't think so. So the next time somebody tells you that China is some kind of propaganda or whatever, Chinese media is propaganda, well, I want you to remember that institutions like the Global Times are asking journalists like myself to write articles such as this, to write articles about why the CIA should be abolished. And so that's what I want to quickly share with you before I head out here. So I wrote, and it was published October 10th, I should have said, October 10th. The CIA has given the human race many reasons to desire its abolition. And so I'm going to talk, so this talks about why abolish the CIA is something we should be taking up. And I say that U.S. intelligence agencies are largely held in esteem by U.S. media and some American people, despite their long history of serving the interests of elites at the expense of humanity. The U.S. has 17 intelligence agencies of varying acronyms, which are designated to conduct the affairs of the state in secrecy. No other U.S. intelligence agency is more recognized globally than the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. The CIA was established soon after the conclusion of World War II and turned 75 this year. The U.S. was at that point the world's biggest economy and military power, and the CIA's covert operations were tasked with helping the U.S. maintain world superpower status amid the growth of socialist alternatives such as the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China. So the CIA was founded officially 75 years ago, 1947, and its mission was covert operations globally to wage the Cold War. What was a newer Cold War back then, but it was all about the Cold War. It was all about the Soviet Union. It was all about repressing socialism. The CIA has given the human race many reasons to desire abolition, or its abolition. CIA operations across the world have sown chaos and destabilized entire regions. According to foreign policy critic and author William Blum, the CIA participated in the attempted overthrow of more than 40 governments around the world over the course of 5 decades. Some of the most well-known examples include helping facilitate the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz, a progressive and democratically elected leader in Guatemala, Mohamed Mossadegh in Iran, after he, in 1953, attempted to nationalize Iran's oil, BP oil, actually, at that time. Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of Congo, when Patrice Lumumba declared neutrality, but said he would have a relationship with the Soviet Union, and also said that Congo's rich resources were the Congos, and that the DRC would basically operate its vast mineral resources for its own benefit first. And Salvador Allende in Chile for a similar situation. Salvador Allende was a socialist. He was nominated, but the CIA, September 11, 1973, sponsored a coup, helped facilitate a coup, which violently killed him, and also destabilized that government, put in Pinochet, and you know the rest. So the CIA's history is marked by a broad scope of powers and a lack of transparency. In 1975, the U.S. Congress held hearings, the Church Committee hearings, that detailed a number of CIA abuses, including Operation Mockingbird, where the agency recruited, organized, and embedded itself in major media organizations to spread misinformation. The CIA has also spearheaded the Board of Broadcasting Governors, now rebranded as the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which established entire media organizations such as Radio Free Asia to undermine communist-led governments around the world. In 1951, the CIA attempted to broadcast Radio Free Asia in China by airlifting radio devices on balloons from the island of Taiwan, but abandoned the plan when the receivers were blown back by the wind. So that's the real roots of Radio Free Asia, the one you see now. You know, the U.S. Agency for Global Media has basically said it's no longer CIA funded. It's funded by Congress. But nonetheless, the initial story is hilarious. Radio Free Asia was founded, and you can find the archived New York Times article online. But the Radio Free Asia started in 1951, and most Chinese households didn't have radio receivers. Only a certain few wealthy landed aristocrats, you could say, semi-feudal elites had that kind of technology. Very rare, though, and it was concentrated mainly in the cities. And at that time, there weren't many people in the cities. So it was mainly countryside, mainly rural. So the CIA thought it could blow people from Taiwan, Formosa at that time, radio receivers to help give them the connection from the city centers. And they all got blown away by the wind, and they had to they couldn't do it. So it was a really pathetic attempt, and I think it's just a really funny story. So and just so how far the intelligence apparatus will go to undermine the Chinese Revolution. The CIA is no less dangerous now as it was then. Many of the CIA's operations have directly informed massive escalations in U.S. wars and human rights abuses. Operation Cyclone, for example, funded armed groups in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union, with this policy creating a template for U.S. foreign policy establishment forces to use in its ongoing campaign of arming and supporting regime change forces in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Ukraine, and elsewhere. So the Mujahideen was the main force that benefited from Operation Cyclone by the CIA. And of course, we see the fruits of that still in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Ukraine, and elsewhere, where the U.S. continues to fund proxy forces for the same purposes, to undermine Russia, undermine China, undermine any sovereign country. The wanton torture of anti-colonial forces in Vietnam under the Phoenix program helped inform the torture campaign that the CIA employed during the War on Terror. The CIA and the rest of the U.S. intelligence community has led the way in fear-mongering about China as part of the U.S.'s military strategy of quote-unquote strategic competition outlined by Joe Biden's administration. So on October 7, 2021, so a year ago, CIA Director William Burns called China the quote-unquote most important geopolitical threat we face in the 21st century and announced that the mission centers would be established to focus more on China. In 2020, Chinese security firm Qihu 360 discovered a massive CIA hacking campaign that targeted China's aviation, technology, and energy sectors. Last month, China's National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center found that the NSA hacked into the servers of Northwestern Polytechnic University in an attempt to steal the personal data of teachers and students. The CIA and other U.S. intelligence agencies have spread Cold War-like propaganda while carrying out the very actions they accuse of China. This is exactly what we were talking about with Jill Stein, right? They accused Jill Stein of being a Russian asset. They accused Jill Stein of working with Putin and working for Putin. And then they say that all of this is to undermine U.S. elections, this Russiagate conspiracy. Well, then you find out that the intelligence apparatus and these private contractors, right, they're doing this exact thing and blaming it on Russia and China. They're actually going after the election system, causing instability. It's an operations on its own electoral system. Well, China, it's not often talked about, but China has been the target of intelligence operations. Now, one thing that China has an advantage, right, is that China has a highly developed high-tech sector, information technology sector. It also has robust domestic industries, right, that are not controlled by foreign capital. So it has certain advantages, and it also has a strong communist party that's very popular, and also a strong state-owned economic sector. All of those things gives it advantages and allows for it to remain sovereign. It allows for it to protect itself from the CIA. It's not really talked about that much, but that's a big reason for the Great Firewall. While it's not always well received, and while perhaps China's censors can be very, how should I say, they can extend pretty far in some instances. Maybe things are overreactions at times. Mistakes can be made. Errors can be made. But at the same time, the Great Firewall has been very effective in preventing what has happened to us, right? Where you have Meta, what used to be Facebook, where you have all these big corporations stealing data, surveilling us, sending our information to the government, to intelligence agencies. That doesn't exist in China. The U.S. intelligence has complained many times they can't get into China, and that's why William Burns, the the CIA director made this declaration and said, we need to focus more. But these mission centers are not going to be located in China. They're going to be located around China with partners in order to try to come up with some kind of strategy to spy on China. That's how pathetic the U.S. is right now in its new Cold War. But that just shows that the CIA, right, is just incredibly dangerous. It is seeking to provoke war with China. And it's not often talked about, right? We often hear people like Matt Stoller, right, talk about, oh, China is in league with Wall Street and with the Democrats, and China is, working with US monopolies to undermine the United States. All this nonsense, when the reality is that the US government is seeking a war with China. First, a new Cold War, but as we see with what's happening with Russia, it really is about testing the waters for what an actual war would be like. And that's why you have all these escalations in Taiwan and elsewhere, but it's also why you have the CIA turning its attention to China. The CIA is an extension of a broader deep state, better termed the real state, that drives U.S. domestic and foreign policy. Journalists like Julian Assange and nations such as China, Iran, and Russia are viewed as threats to be silenced by U.S. elites seeking dominance and maximal profit for themselves. Their narrow interests thrive in conditions of instability and war, and the CIA is funded with an unknown amount of U.S. dollars to help facilitate them. An end to the CIA would thus be a welcome development for the cause of peace, now and in the future. So, I mean, I'm just going to put this out there. I mean, do you think that the US corporate media would allow that on their channels? I don't think so. I don't think they would. And I think that was a very, that's an opinion piece, it's an analysis. I think it's a decent one. I think it's one that is well organized, and I don't hype up my own writing, but I consider myself a quality writer. I don't write big, long pieces anymore because of my responsibilities to this media now and other things. But nonetheless, you won't get that analysis in the corporate media, and you won't get anyone like myself, Ben Norton, anyone else who does journalism work independently from a left perspective, a socialist perspective, an anti-imperialist perspective on there. No, we're likely to get repressed more so than we are to be embraced or to even have any opportunity to be there. So that's why it's so important to support independent media. I mean, that's really the crux of the message here, is that the Global Times will publish people like myself. But, we need to create alternatives right here in the United States. Just like we need to exit the Democratic Party, we also need to be creating alternatives to the Democratic Party politically, organizationally, and we need media that is an alternative to Democratic Party establishment politics, to all establishment politics, to the entire ruling class superstructure. We need to be creating that, but we are using the master's tools. So that means the master's tools, whenever they see fit, are going to reorganize them and reshape them to try to crush us. So that's why we ask for support. That's why I ask for support for this channel. Appreciate all the support you've been able to give. Please do, of course, subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. Please do also become a member of this channel if you are able.